Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is Romans Education Part 7, and this is going to be session 19. And before we get started, I'd like to just call your attention to something by way of reminder. I know that you realize it. If we were to have a discussion or a conversation about it, I know that all of you would be able to tell me that this is our initial instruction in our sonship skills that we're going to be using when we get to the creature. I know you're aware of that. This is the doctrine that makes us think like our Heavenly Father thinks. And it not only gets us to think what He thinks, but it causes us to think the same thing for the exact same reasons. And that's important. It's not like, oh, guess what? We happen to be thinking the same thing. But you happen to be thinking the same thing for the same godly reasons that He's thinking about it. And that is an important distinction. And the reason I'm having this little moment before we actually start the lesson to talk to you about this is because I want to remind you every once in a while, and I know that this group takes this seriously, but what I want to do is I want to remind us all that it's going to take more than just showing up here on Sunday and hearing this. This has to be something that we're engaged with during the week. And I know right now we've been looking at the first aspect of all of this, but this is the thing that you need to have as part of your prayer life. This is how this gets integrated into our soul, that we're talking to our Father, and when we look at that first verse, which we'll put up, as a matter of fact, I'll just put it up now. No, I won't either, because I forgot we left off going to 1 John. I thought it was going to be Romans 13:12. But when you think about that verse over there, the night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. That everything that we're discussing, all the verses that we're looking at, are feeding into our understanding that's encapsulated in that little brief opening part of verse 12. And that's what you've got to be talking to your Father about. That's what you've got to be looking at. And I know that you're looking at the notes and you're having discussions about it, and I applaud that. But I just want to encourage you to keep doing that. Look, these lessons are going out everywhere. And so I'm not just saying it to you, I'm also saying it to the people who are out there watching this online or on DVD or however whatever media they're using. I'm saying, do your homework. The reason teachers are supposed to assign homework is not because that is my way of getting getting even with those kids in my class. Maybe it is their way of getting evil. Okay, you get ahead, right? Okay. So it's not just about that. What it's really about is knowing that you can do that work on your own, that you have mastered the material. That if you can take that stuff home and look at those problems and work them out and come to the right answer, then it shows I'm getting it. But if you can't, then that tells you something too. I missed something somewhere along the process that I need to go back and get that. And so since we're going to be looking at this operation of making an impact on Satan and his policy of evil, then it is important for us to be able to master this material ourselves. And so, look, you've got to start thinking about this like the time to get this done is diminishing and the door of opportunity is slowly closing. And so let's make the most of that. That's the thing that I really... Hey, buddy. Broken arm and all. Okay. And and so I just really want us to think about... Okay. I'll just say it this way. I tried to say it in a different way so it wouldn't look like I'm... Well, not on y'all, but it wouldn't look like I'm trying to throw something else under the bus, but in the old days, we went to church, and if, we drifted mentally, it didn't matter too much because the next Sunday was something else. This is an education, and every part of this education is part of what you have to get it going in the end. So this isn't the way that it used to be. If you think about the way we used to do sermons, you could ask somebody, hey, what did the preacher preach on 2 weeks ago? Odds are you wouldn't remember it. You wouldn't remember. In fact, we used to joke about it. Even when we were doing it, we noticed that, and we said, people only remember 2 things when you're preaching a sermon, really. Unless it's just a really out-of-the-park, grand slam, hoopla type something that's so special that everybody remembers something about it. Basically, on the normal run of sermons, people remember 2 things out of that sermon. And that's the verse that you read at the start and the illustrations you gave during the sermon. So, how long, yeah. Yeah. So, so if you went to the Sermon on the Mount and you read over there, the meek shall inherit the earth, if 3 months later you went back and read that verse, people would go, yeah, he read this verse. Yeah, we remember that. Or you tell the illustration like I tell illustrations over and over and over. And you go, yeah, we heard that one. Yeah, we heard that one. You remember those. But the stuff in between all of that, so you know what? We used to jokingly say, if you can use another verse to start and change your illustrations, you could preach the same sermon 52 times a year and nobody would know. I don't know if you could do it 52 times, but maybe 50. Okay, I'm kidding.
Well, this is very interesting to me. It really is.
Well, thank you, Bertha.
It is. It's very interesting.
I paid her $10. Was that a $10 compliment? Was that? Okay.
The preacher tells a fib.
Hey.
It's not on him now.
Hey. No, I covered that. The all liars have their part in the lake of fire is a particular lie that's going on over there. Okay, yeah.
This is telling me how everything fits in. I've been in the Baptist church all of my life, but honest to gosh, I've learned how things fit in more in this study than I ever knew before. When you're in the Baptist church, you take what other people want you to study.
Yeah, I grew up in that.
Yep.
I know what that's like.
And this is very, very interesting. Never heard about the course of judgment. Right.
Oh, well, thanks for saying that. Okay, so let's get ourselves going here. We're going to be talking about, as you can see from what's on the board, we're going to be defining the light and the darkness. It's not the only thing we're doing, but if I had to pick something, that's what I picked to kind of categorize, because that's what the start of this session is going to pick up on. Because if you remember, at the end of our previous session, I was telling you we're going to turn over to a verse in 1 John. We never turned to that verse. So today, we are going to pick up on that. And what we're going to do by turning to 1 John is we're going to discover a particular kind of terminology that's being used to describe something that we have to be aware of in this dispensation of grace. We're going to get familiar with the terms light and darkness. We've already been reading about those, and we're going to see that that's not talking about visual light that you see with your eyes, or if you turn off the lights in your home or something like that, but they are describing something else. And we're going to look at those terms night and day. And you understand that's not the cycles of a 24-hour day. But there are parallels between literal light and darkness and a literal day and night that parallel the spiritual issues that we're going to be looking at as we go through. But what I need us to do is I need us to get familiar with the terminology so that when we see the terms, we automatically realize what that's talking about. And we can intelligently understand those verses. And so now, 1 John, and as we get ready to turn over there, remember that 1 John is written to the believing remnant of Israel. And as I told you before, there are some particular activities that Satan is producing during the nighttime, when the dispensation of grace is over and the remainder of the night takes place. And how do we know there's yet a remainder of night to take place? Because of that wording in Romans 13:12. When this dispensation of grace came in, the night was far spent, but not completely spent. So when this is over, the rest of that night will take place, and then the day is at hand, but the day won't start immediately, because there's that portion of the night that still has to take place. And so Satan has some operations that he is going to carry out against the believing remnant. I'm going to make a statement here that I'll give you the details as we go through. It is important to realize that this is another parallel issue. That what Satan was doing before the dispensation of grace came in, he is continuing to do during the dispensation of grace, because of what he wants to accomplish in the remaining portion of the night. Now I'm going to say it to you this way, and I'm going to say this 2 more times as we look at some various details of this during the lesson. But look, when he got to here, and remember the world was in a condition where they were called vessels of wrath, fitted to destruction, worthy to be destroyed by the Lord's day of wrath. He needed to keep the coal stoked into the engine, or to keep the pot boiling, or to keep the engine revved, whatever analogy you want to use. It's very important that he keeps that thing running at that same high rate through the dispensation of grace, because there's something that needs that. He needs that when he gets out here to the remaining portion of his night and Israel's program resumes. There's something that he has we haven't talked about it yet, but we will. There's something that's going to be happening out here in the remaining portion of that night that he can't afford to let off the gas and start coasting down in the dispensation of grace, because when it gets to here, there's something that's going to happen there that requires him to have kept this at a high boil, so to speak. He can't afford to waste time bringing it back to a boil. So it's continuing to go this nighttime, and as we looked at it, this night of increasing darkness reached a zenith over here, and it continues all the way to the other side, and that thing has to be kept at a high rate. All right, now just saying it that way makes you understand, well, if you think about what we're going to be doing, now it's going to make you understand something about his response. But we'll talk about that detail when we get over there. So 1 John is talking about, and by the way, we wrote this in, so if you have your timeline, if you have a blank one, or if you haven't already filled it in, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John are something that is written to the remnant, specifically to them during this nighttime after the dispensation of grace, that is going to warn them about this particular operation that Satan is attempting to do. And there's a 3-phased operation. The first one is in 1 John, the second one is in 2 John, and the third one is in 3 John. And we may have an opportunity to go over and look at that some later on, but for now, all I want to do is kind of set you up for what we're about to read. So I'm going to read a couple of passages here together, and then we're going to kind of break them down into parts and look at these different parts as we look at this terminology. So, and by the way, just to set that up one more time, because this is Satan's night, and this is going to be the darkest part of his night. That night is going to be dispelled with the light of the Lord's day. Just like when the day dawns and the darkness begins to dissipate, that's what the day of the Lord's wrath is going to do. It is going to dispel the darkness of the night and do away with Satan's night. And it will take all of that day coming in its fullness to be able to do that. Okay, now, 1 John chapter 1 and verse 5. This is the verse that we were leading up to when we left off in our last session, and it's the one we'll take up with here. This then is the message which we have heard of Him, and declare unto you, that God is light, and in Him is no darkness at all. If we say that we have fellowship with Him, and walk in darkness, we lie and do not the truth. But if we walk in the light, as He is in the light, we have fellowship one with another, and the blood of Jesus Christ His Son cleanseth us from all sin. If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, He's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. If we say that we have not sinned, we make Him a liar, and His word is not in us. Now, there's several things that we're going to come back and we're going to look at. We'll break this down. But I want you to notice, first of all, there's two types of highlights through this verse. There's the issue in yellow that's contrasting light and darkness. And you're going to find that all throughout, there's going to be this contrast of issues, a contrast of people, a contrast of entities. There's going to be this two sides to everything that's going to be listed in all these verses. In the yellow, we're talking about light and darkness. And while we haven't pointed it out, he is about to start with something very general. God is light, and he's going to carry that down to more and more detailed as he goes through this passage in 1 John. But we'll look at that in just a moment. But in that kind of purpley highlight there, that is the difference between the truth and the lie. Or as we called it last week, the untruth. There are, by the way, let me get you back to the end of this, because you can see God is light and in Him is no darkness. And then he talks about walking in darkness. Then he says we lie and do not the truth. And then back to walking in the light. And then the truth is not in us. So here's what you're understanding right from the beginning. That when you talk about light, you're talking about the truth. When you talk about darkness, you're talking about the untruth. So when you talk about the night having darkness, he's not just talking about when you walk outside and there's no light out there, but he's talking about the condition that Satan has produced, a night of increasing darkness. Look, let me just talk to you about this just for a second. I haven't talked to you about when Satan started bringing in his night. We haven't identified that event yet. But we do know that he did establish this night, and it increased in darkness. If it's increasing in darkness, based on the definitions that we now know, what does that mean? Right, there are more and more of Satan's lies, and guess what? When he tells those lies, he is presenting them as though they are the truth. And so he is what the night is trying to produce is the replacement of the truth with Satan's untruth. And as the world began to adopt that, as they began to just, and you know one of the ways that you get that done? Do you know how you establish an untruth? You keep telling it, and you keep telling it, and you keep telling it, and you keep telling it. And you know what? And after a while, people just default to that. And the world has done that. And it has bought in to this untruth that Satan is establishing. Now, there are other things along with that, but we're not talking, we've discussed all those things. In other words, did it produce a world of ungodly? Yes. But we discussed that. What we're looking at now is His activities behind the scene and what it was He was producing. And so as He's coming through, He is actually establishing His untruth. And the more people that buy into that untruth, the darker His night is. And we started looking at this last week under that title, The Power of Darkness. And that has to do with the power of the darkness of His untruth. Okay, now with that being said, what I want to do is give you this next verse. 1 John 2:7, Brethren, I write no new commandment unto you, but an old commandment which you had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word which you have heard from... By the way, let me back you up. You see this last one, verse 10? If we say that we have not sinned, we make Him a liar, and His word is not in us. That tells you something very important. When you're talking about the light and the truth, you know that that is going to be found where? In His word, right? This is very important. The repository for truth is the Word. In other words, if you say, well, where can I go to find truth? Where's the repository of truth? Where is it? It's in the Word. Yeah, it's in the Bible. It's in the Word of God. In fact, when you talk about 2 Timothy 2:15, rightly dividing the what? The word of, it's the word of truth. He didn't call it that just because he was looking for something good to say about it. There's an issue there about truth and error. And so rightly dividing the word of truth. The word is the repository for truth. If someone wants to come and say, well, if Milton is talking about something and somebody else disagrees with him and they say, well, how do you know what you're saying is the truth? I have as much right to the truth as you do. The only defense against that would for Milt to say, because what I'm saying, I'm not saying of myself, I'm saying what's in the word of truth. That is the repository for truth. So if you're Satan and you want to get away from that, one of the first things you need to do is begin to cast doubt on the authority of the word of truth. Yes? And so you have to start correcting it. And you do it very slyly. Some guys buy into this because this is what you're taught in school. They don't really realize what they're doing, but they've kind of gone along because they'll be preaching and they get to a place and they learn this in their Bible classes in college or seminary, and they'll stop and they'll say, now this is an unfortunate rendering of this word because actually the word in the Greek is, and then they spiel off a Greek word and they say, and actually what that means is, and it's unfortunate that the King James translators use this word because a better word would be, and what they're doing is they're chipping away just little by little at the authority of the word of truth. That's what's happening. And so when you go to Bible college now, unless you're in a very small minority of them, you're going to find a lot of correcting. And if that's the case, listen, if they're right, there is no repository for truth. If this is full of errors, all we have is our opinions. And that's exactly where Satan wants it to go. Because he's got the majority. So then it just becomes who can shout down who. That's what he's after. That's part of what he's after. And so, that's so when he says, if we say that we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word. Because of everything that he's been saying up above that, the truth is not in us. Walking in the light, and we do not... When he's talking about those issues, at the end, he's saying, it's not only that the truth is not in us, His word is not in us. Okay, now let me pick you up on that next one. 1 John 2:7. Brethren, I write no new commandment unto you, but an old commandment which you had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word which you heard from the beginning. Again, a new commandment I write unto you. Which thing, and now he's saying a new commandment, okay? He said there is an old commandment. He reminds them of that. And then he says in verse 8, again, a new commandment I write unto you, which thing is true in Him and in you. So now we're back to this issue of truth. And what is he going to do? He's going to come right back and talk about light and darkness. I'm trying to show you how I know that light is talking about the truth and darkness is talking about error. How do we know that? Because as he comes through in all of these passages and talks about light and darkness, he follows right along with truth and the lie. And so he says, because the darkness is past and the true light now shineth. Now that is an interesting turn of phrase, and we're going to have to come back and look at that. But let's keep reading. He that saith he is in the light and hateth his brother is in darkness even until now. He that loveth his brother abideth in the light, and there is none occasion of stumbling in him. But he that hateth his brother is in darkness, and walketh in darkness, and knoweth not whither he goeth, because that darkness hath blinded his eyes. So all I'm trying to establish here is this terminology that we're going to have to get used to seeing in our Bible if we're going to understand what Satan is doing. So back to verse 7, just to focus on that. Look at this, what he says in this highlighted part. Brethren, I write no new commandment unto you, but an old commandment which you had from the beginning. Now, when he says from the beginning, he's not talking about in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. This is John writing. So when he says, this is what I wrote to you in the beginning, what's he talking about? He's talking about his gospel. The gospel of John. That is what he's talking about. The old commandment is the word which you have heard from the beginning. And by the way, when John was writing that, who was he quoting over there? He's quoting the Lord, wasn't he? And so that's what that is referring to. Now, 1 John 2:8. Let's take this next verse. Again, a new commandment I write unto you, which thing is true. So here's what's going to happen. John's writing an old commandment, and now he's going to add to that a new commandment. Does anybody remember what the old commandment was? We read this whole passage, and he talked about he that hateth his brother. If he says he walks in the light and he hates his brother, he's in darkness even until now. But he that loveth his brother abideth in the light. What was the old commandment? Yeah, to love one another. That was the old commandment, to love one another. Didn't that old commandment show up back in the law of Moses? It did. And Jesus is teaching that as corrective doctrine to how they had corrupted and perverted the law. So he is reteaching the truth of that commandment, and John records that. The same John that writes these epistles of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And so when he says this new commandment, this is the new commandment. What is that? If the old commandment was to love one another, now John is going to add something to this that lets them see something about what the adversary is going to be doing to them here, so that they don't get deceived by what he's trying to do. This is part of what John is trying to get them to understand. Now let's put the next part with it. Again, a new commandment I write unto you, which thing is true in him and in you, because the darkness is past, and the true light now shineth. Now that is a very important phrase. When he says, when I first read that, it took me a while to figure that out. You know why? I wasn't looking at the words and thinking about the words. I was replacing them with something else. In my head, I read it like this. Because the night is past and the light is now shining. That's the way I thought about it. But he didn't say the night is past. See, that's why that caused me confusion. Because I understood the night came all the way over to here. So it's not that the night, when he says the darkness is past, he's not talking about the night being over. I'm just hesitating to see if anybody's going to latch on to this. When Jesus shows up, let me see how I can say. Were you going to say something, honey? No? I'm talking to my wife. People on DVD are wondering what I'm doing now. Okay.
So Christ is already doing his earthly work, so he's the true light, and his
Okay.
light is shining.
Okay, and when did he come upon the scene? Right back here. Right back here. All right, now here's what you have to understand. When Satan was producing this increasing darkness of his night, remember this climactic stage started with John the Baptist? When you get to John the Baptist, you have to understand that not just in Israel, but also in the world, the light, which is what? The truth, was almost completely extinguished. Israel had, who had the Scriptures? Israel. And what had they done with them? They had corrupted them through the traditions of men and their corrupted doctrine and all their vain religious system. They had turned all of that into something that, well, here's what the prophet, they had made void the law. It didn't even do what it was supposed to do anymore. So when you get to this point, there's almost that Satan. Now, I'm not talking about the ungodliness issue that's going to reach a zenith over here. I'm talking about the untruth that is getting established. And when you get to here, there's almost no light left in the world. We know what Israel is doing. They've created this vain religious system whereby the Pharisees think they're so righteous they don't need to be saved. That God's already happy enough with them. And they're praying prayers like, "Dear God, I thank Thee I am not like this publican." Remember that? So as they're doing that, what's the world doing? The world of Gentiles. They're worshiping every god except the true God. Remember, Paul is over on Mars Hill, and they've got, remember, I was telling you, the slogan was, it's easier to find a God than a man over there. And they even had one monument set up to the unknown God, in case we missed one. And Paul goes, "Hey, I notice you've got one over here to the God you don't know anything about. I'm going to declare him unto you, because you don't know anything about this God." And it's, you know what? He's the only true God. So where are the Gentiles? They're in darkness. By the way, that's going to shed light. What I just told you is going to shed some light on the things that Paul is going to talk about later when he talks about where Gentiles were in time past, that they were under darkness. Or you were sometimes darkness. You remember that phrase? You were sometimes darkness. That you didn't have any light in you. Now, if that's where the Gentiles are, the world at large is pretty much dark. What about a light in Israel? See, that light's been put out too. And there's only a few people, a few minor people. By the way, you have to understand that when Jesus comes, He has to teach His apostles, or His disciples, as they're called early on, Because they don't know the truth either. The only thing they've been educated in is what the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the lawyers and the scribes and all of those have been telling them. That's all they know. And that's why he's got to keep instructing them in the truth. So when John the Baptist shows up, he is the forerunner for who? All right, for Jesus Christ. And when he comes in described as the light of the world. And those that follow him. Why? Because the whole world lieth in darkness. So when he comes in, here's what John writes about him. He is the true light that lighteth every man. What God is doing is responding to Satan's increasing night of darkness by shining this brilliant light in Israel. Now people are going to have to make a choice about whether they're going to choose untruth or truth, darkness or light. And when Jesus talks to His disciples and those that believe in Him, you know what He's going to say to them? Ye are the light of the world. And that's why you're not going to, he said, don't hide that light, but set it on a hill. We want this light to shine. We want to expose the darkness of untruth. So when he says, and a new commandment I write unto you, which thing is true in him and in you, because the darkness is past and the true light, Karen was right, that's Jesus Christ. He comes in as the light that lights the world. And it's shining as in a dark place. Because that's the condition of the world. And so what Satan is trying to do with the believing remnant out here, that's who John's really writing to, doctrinally, that's the application. He's going to say, some things are going to happen with the adversary out here. Let me tell you another piece of this. The reason this has to remain at a high boil coming through here is because when he gets here, there's some intensifying that has to take place on the part of Satan's darkness and night, because now it's like put the pedal to the metal, so to speak. Now trump that thing to the floor, because there's something he's trying to get done out here, and he already needs this thing to be full blast so that he doesn't have to waste any time trying to rev it back up. One of those things is he's going to try to extinguish the light of the believing remnant. Now that is what he's after there. And so, and they're being warned about this. Now let me just complete the verse before we stop for the break. Now I'm going to give you verse 9. We've seen verse 8. He that saith he's in the light and hateth his brother is in darkness even until now. And what John is talking about here is, if you say you're in the light, but you do something, your deeds don't demonstrate what is in the repository of light. In other words, if it doesn't match up with where you can go and find... Look, how do you know if what you're doing is right or wrong? There has to be a standard by which you can judge what is right and what is wrong. And we've already seen. That's the Word. And so he says, because can't anybody say, I'm in the light? Anybody can say that. And it doesn't matter what they say after that, because what they want is they just want it to be a matter of opinion. So people say that. Well, what I'm doing is not wrong. Well, it is wrong. Well, in your opinion it is, but in my opinion it's not. Well, see, here's what I used to say, and this is still true. I have my opinion, you have your opinion, and God has His. And His is the only one that counts. So, what we do is we judge everything from the truth of His Word. That Word has always been under attack, because part of what Satan is doing is always to cast doubt on that standard by which we judge truth and error. So what John is doing here is he is pointing out this dichotomy again between loving your brother and hating your brother. You can say you're in the light, but if you hate your brother, then is it he that saith he's in the light and hateth his brother is in darkness. You're living out of something that's not true. If you think this is how it goes, then it can't happen like that. And so what does the Lord do? He begins in His public ministry to take on Israel's vain religious system. This is one of the reasons the Pharisees took such umbrage with what He was doing, because He is basically correcting all of those things they got wrong for all that time, and it was entrenched. That's why the nation was dark. They were so entrenched in it, they never gave it a second thought. I'm saying that Do you understand where that's leading? That when the Pharisees were teaching all the... Look, what did they just come out of before John the Baptist? 400... You don't have to write it on your timeline. 400 years of silence. They didn't hear a peep from God. So you know what they do? They put together that Babylonian Talmud. They get all those extra books that are supposedly the books that belong in your Bible over there, like Maccabees and the Shepherd of Hermes and Bel and the Dragon and Tobit and all of those others, the Epistle of Barnabas. Those all get created during that time when God said, you're not going to get any scripture from me. You're not going to get any prophets from me. There's not anybody that's going to get a vision. There's not anybody that's going to get anything from me. And so you know what they do? They invent their own. Do they still have all the prophets? They do. But they invent their own. And by the time John the Baptist shows up, they have developed Israel's, what James calls, their vain religious system. He talks about what it is that they have formulated with their own traditions and their own ideas and their own thoughts of how they did it. Look, I just say this and we'll stop for the break because I know the alarm went off. But look, you've got to understand, the Pharisees believed with all of their heart they were righteous. They did everything they were supposed to do. Remember, the brag was, I even tithe of the mint in my garden. Were they about? Yes, it was about how they perceived it, but were they about keeping the law? Yeah, they were the sticklers. Hey, as a young guy in Bible college, nobody could explain this kind of stuff. I used to wonder, what was wrong with them going to the nth degree to keep the law? That's what I wondered. They didn't have anybody explain. All they did was talk about the Pharisees being bad guys. And the only way anybody ever explained it was, well, they weren't really doing it in their heart. They were doing it for the praise of men. Well, there's no doubt there was some of that there. But you understand, they believed that they were doing the things of righteousness as prescribed by the law. That's what they thought they were doing. Listen to me carefully. And that's what we have today. We have people who are crossing every T and dotting every I, and they are doing every good thing they can think of, and they're behaving themselves in a certain way because they believe that's what it's going to take. And they missed it. They missed it. And and I know what you're thinking. I know. Yeah, but I mean, they may not know about sonship, but isn't that other better? It is the counterfeit. As much as Israel's vain religious system was condemning them all, this is the counterfeit for the dispensation of grace. Is it a big deal? It is to your Father. Okay, now I have to say something in order for that to make sense, but to do that I need 5 more minutes. So we'll wait until after the break. Look, I'm about to draw this parallel issue here. This is very important. Very important that we get this down. You know what this is about to do? It is about to frame a whole section of your thinking. So as you look at things that are just happening in the world that before you kind of thought, well, I mean, they're not right, but I mean, is that really such a big deal? Or, I mean, so what's the problem if this or if that? Now I'm going to frame that thinking for you, because what you're going to see is that those things are actually contributing to the darkness. Yeah, they're helping the adversary. We're stoking the coals in his engine.